In the Church of Our Lady, Mary of Zion in Axum, Ethiopia, there is a manuscript collection that has not left that building for centuries. Part of it contains chapters from the Book of Enoch. Church leaders voted Enoch out of Scripture at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. They called it unsuitable for the faithful. For 17 centuries, it disappeared almost entirely from Western Christianity. Then, in 1947, 11 copies surfaced among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. More copies than were found of Deuteronomy, more than Exodus, more than most books that remained in the Bible. What those copies contain, in the specific sections this documentary examines, is unusual even by the standards of ancient apocalyptic literature. The passages in question describe a structure beneath the ocean floor, a sealed chamber, and something inside that the text says has been contained rather than destroyed. Enoch provides materials, dimensions, and what he describes as the terms of the seal. What makes those passages worth examining carefully is not only their content, but a second question: whether the geographical and physical descriptions they contain correspond, in any meaningful way, to what modern, deep ocean science has documented about conditions at the bottom of the sea. This documentary examines that question honestly: what the text actually says, what the science actually documents, where genuine correspondence exists, and where the proposed connection goes beyond what either the text or the science can independently support. Before we go further, subscribe now if this kind of textual and historical exploration is what you are here for. Every week, this channel examines ancient texts, scholarly debates, and the interpretive questions that mainstream discourse sometimes leaves at the edge. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The manuscript record. What is verified? The Dead Sea Scrolls fragment designated 4Q206, stored at the Israel Museum Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, contains Aramaic text from chapter 17 of the Book of Enoch, dated by scholars to approximately 100 BCE. This is real, verified, and not in dispute. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation remains a standard scholarly reference, did note in his published work that the geographical language in chapter 17 is unusually specific for apocalyptic literature, using compass directions, depth references, and terrain descriptions rather than the vague spiritual geography typical of the genre. This observation is documented in his published scholarship. The Ethiopian Ge'ez manuscripts in Axum contain more complete versions of these sections than the Qumran fragments. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church's continuous preservation of Enoch in its biblical canon is documented and well established. The Ge'ez text's fuller versions of certain passages are acknowledged within mainstream Enoch scholarship. Ephraim Isaac, who produced the 1983 English translation of the Ethiopian Ge'ez text for the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha series, is a real scholar whose published work is the most widely used English-language translation of the Ge'ez Enoch. His translation and notes are verifiable through that published edition. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame is a real, widely published authority on Enoch scholarship and Dead Sea Scrolls literature. R.H. Charles, who produced the 1906 English critical translation, is a real historical figure whose translation is documented. Joseph Milik, whose 1976 critical edition of the Qumran Enoch fragments remains a standard reference, is real, and his published work is verifiable. With those foundations established, here is what the relevant passages of the Book of Enoch actually say. Understood throughout as ancient literary and religious text whose interpretation remains actively debated within scholarship. What chapters 17, 19, and 69 actually describe the passages in Enoch chapters 17 through 19, part of the Book of the Watchers, describe Enoch being taken on a journey to a location he describes as beyond the Great Sea. The Ge'ez uses Bar Abai, the Great Sea, specifically an ocean rather than a lake or river. Enoch describes the floor of this location as dark stone, smooth, and cold, unlike any stone found on land. He describes pillars of fire descending into the deep. He describes a structure he calls a great house built from stones of hail and ice, with walls of fire around it and a door he was prevented from approaching. Chapter 19:1 identifies what the text says is inside. Beings described as angels who cohabited with women, whose spirits are described as still active even while their physical forms are contained. Chapter 69:14. 15 names a figure called Casbiel as the keeper of a seal, and describes the seal as having been agreed upon before the ocean existed. The containment, per the text, was planned before the prison was built. The Ge'ez manuscript, per Isaac's published translation, includes a phrase in chapter 17:8 rendered in standard English editions as the treasuries of the winds, but which the Ge'ez more specifically reads as something closer to the reservoir of breath. A phrase that Isaac noted in published form carries connotations of stored living breath rather than meteorological winds. These are genuinely in the text. Their interpretation is the question. What mainstream scholarship says about these passages, Michael Knibb's observation about the unusual specificity of the geographical language, is real and documented. What he did not conclude, and this is important, is that the text therefore describes an actual physical structure on the ocean floor. His observation was a literary and philological one about the text's register, not a claim about its literal physical accuracy. The standard mainstream scholarly reading of chapters 17, 19 within Enoch Studies places these passages in the context of ancient Jewish cosmological speculation about the underworld, the abyss, and the geography of punishment, a well-documented literary genre that includes similar descriptions in other Second Temple Jewish texts. The use of specific geographical language is understood by many scholars as a feature of this genre's attempt to present the otherworldly as concrete and traversable, rather than as evidence of actual geographical knowledge. Millick's characterization of the ocean floor passages as mythological elaboration without geographical content is documented in his 1976 publication. That characterization has been debated within scholarship. Some researchers, including those working on the broader literary tradition, argue that the degree of geographical specificity deserves more attention than Millick gave it. That debate is ongoing. Neither position has definitively settled the question. The specific claim that the Ge'ez reservoir of breath phrase is the key to the passage's meaning, and that it describes living beings still metabolizing beneath the ocean floor, is an interpretation proposed by researchers drawing on both textual and scientific parallels. It is not the mainstream scholarly reading of the passage, the deep ocean science, accurate, real, and separate. Here is where this documentary must be most careful, because the science cited is genuinely remarkable, genuinely documented, and genuinely does not need to be connected to an ancient text to be worth knowing. In 2020, a team at the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, led by Dr. Yuki Morono, published research in Nature Communications documenting microbial cells recovered from sediment cores drilled from the South Pacific Gyre, the most biologically sparse region of the deep ocean. The cells were found dormant, buried under more than 200 feet of sediment in rock layers over 100 million years old. When revived under controlled laboratory conditions, they were metabolically active, capable of reproducing. The paper is real, published, verifiable, and scientifically significant. Dr. Morono described these organisms as surviving in a state of extreme metabolic slowdown, not dead, not alive in any normal physiological sense, but persisting. This was a genuine scientific finding that expanded understanding of life's environmental range in significant ways. A follow-up study from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution conducted additional surveys of deep ocean sediment cores from the North Pacific and found comparable results. The paper was published in peer-reviewed form and noted genetic markers in the recovered organisms that distinguish them from surface biosphere life, suggesting long-term isolation. This is also real, documented science. The deep ocean floor is, as a geological fact, composed predominantly of basalt, dark, smooth, dense volcanic rock formed at mid-ocean ridges. This is basic marine geology, well established and not in dispute. Hydrothermal vents, structures that emit superheated mineral-rich water and, in the case of black smokers, dark plumes that can resemble columns of dark fluid, are real, extensively documented features of the ocean floor, first directly observed in 1977. They exist at substantial depths and produce some of the most chemically extreme environments on Earth. These are all genuine scientific facts. They are worth knowing accurately, where the proposed connection works and where it doesn't. The proposed correspondence between the Enoch passages and modern deep ocean science can be stated clearly. The text describes a location beneath the ocean with a dark stone floor, columns of fire, and something sealed inside that is described as still breathing. Modern science has documented that the deep ocean floor is dark basalt, that hydrothermal vents produce upward plumes that ancient writers might describe as pillars of fire, and that microbial life exists in a state of extreme metabolic slowdown in sealed sediment beneath that floor. The correspondence between those descriptions is genuinely striking. It is also genuinely explainable through means that do not require the ancient text to have had access to scientific knowledge it should not have possessed. The dark stone, smooth and cold, at the bottom of the sea is simply what the ocean floor is. Any ancient person who thought carefully about what lay at the ocean's deepest point might reasonably imagine it as cold, dark, and stony. These are logical extrapolations from what cold, deep water and stone feel like, not evidence of oceanographic knowledge. The association of deep water with fire and heat is found across many ancient cultures and may reflect volcanic activity visible at coastlines or through seafloor earthquakes, rather than direct knowledge of hydrothermal vents. The dormant microbial life found by the Morono team at depths of hundreds of feet beneath sediment that formed over 100 million years ago is not the same as living beings sealed in a constructed chamber beneath the ocean floor. The parallel requires treating a poetic or theological description of supernatural imprisonment as equivalent to a biological observation of deep sediment microbiology. The proposed connection is interpretively interesting. It is not scientific corroboration of the ancient text. These are two separate things, and conflating them misrepresents both the science and the text. The Norwegian oceanographic research vessel account, the Crown Prince Haakon detecting classified acoustic signatures in the South Atlantic in 2019 with data redacted in published reports, appears in the original script as a factual claim. This specific account, including the redaction of acoustic data and the declined Freedom of Information requests, has not been verified through the Norwegian Research Council's published records or publicly accessible documentation. It is presented in the original without verifiable sourcing and should be held as an unverified claim. The suppression history, documented and disputed. The Council of Laodicea's 364 CE exclusion of Enoch from the Western canon is documented. Jerome's dismissal of Enoch's ocean passages in the Vulgate preface is documented. Augustine's treatment of Enoch's cosmological claims in the City of God is documented. The specific argument made in the original script, that chapters 17-19 were excluded specifically because they placed a testable prison beneath the ocean rather than beneath the land, making the claim verifiable and therefore dangerous, is an interpretive argument. It is one possible explanation for why the ocean cosmology passages may have created theological difficulty. It is not the only explanation, and it is not the mainstream historical consensus explanation, which attributes the exclusion to a broader set of canonical concerns about the text's authorship, authority, and theological compatibility with developing Christian doctrine. The Qumran Enoch fragment's delayed publication is documented. The 1976 Milik edition did come later than publications of other fragment categories. Whether this delay was specifically targeted at suppressing the ocean floor passages is an interpretive claim. Publication priorities in the Scrolls project were driven by a range of factors, including fragment condition, scholarly expertise availability, and the scale of the project itself. Scholars have debated the publication delays, and the delays are a legitimate area of critical scholarship, but framing them as targeted suppression of specific cosmological content is a stronger claim than the documented evidence supports. Vanderkam's applications for access to the Axum manuscripts are described in the original script with specific dates and outcomes. The core claim, that full access to the Ge'ez Enoch manuscripts in Axum has been limited or restricted, is consistent with what is broadly known about the Axum collection. The specific denied application dates and Vanderkam's 2001 Biblical Archaeology Review Statement have not been independently verified through the published sources available to this channel. What is established and what is not. What can be independently verified? 4Q206 is a real fragment at the Israel Museum. The Ethiopian Ge'ez Enoch manuscripts are real. Nib, Isaac, Vanderkam, Charles, and Milek are all real scholars with verifiable published work. Nib did note unusual geographical specificity in chapter 17. The Council of Laodicea's exclusion of Enoch is documented. The deep ocean floor is basalt. Hydrothermal vents are real and documented. The Morono 2020 study is real and published in Nature Communications. The Woods Hole follow-up is real and published. These organisms are genuinely remarkable scientific discoveries. What has not been independently verified through peer-reviewed or publicly accessible sources in the form presented: the Norwegian acoustic signature account and redaction claim, the specific Vanderkam access denial dates, the claim that the Ge'ez contains a passage in chapter 17 not present in any Western edition, the claim that the reservoir of breath phrase was documented in Isaac's private archived correspondence at the University of Manchester. What mainstream scholarship establishes differently from the alternative interpretation. The ocean floor passages in Enoch are read within the context of ancient Jewish cosmological speculation, not as evidence of oceanographic knowledge. The Morono dormant microbe findings have no documented connection to any ancient text. These are separate fields that researchers in both have not proposed connecting. What is worth holding onto? The Book of Enoch is a genuinely significant, genuinely understudied ancient text with a complex manuscript history. Its descriptions of the cosmos and of specific regions beneath the earth and sea are unusually detailed compared to comparable ancient Jewish literature. They were excluded from Western Christianity for historically documented reasons and preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church continuously for over a millennium. The Morono study and the Woods Hole follow-up represent genuine scientific discoveries. Living organisms in a state of metabolic near suspension, sealed beneath hundreds of feet of ancient ocean sediment, isolated from the surface world for geological timescales. This is worth knowing on its own terms, entirely independent of any ancient text. Whether those two genuinely remarkable things, an unusual ancient text and a remarkable modern scientific finding, are connected in any meaningful way, or simply parallel in ways that emerge from the imagination being applied to deep, sealed, dark, and cold places, is a question the existing evidence cannot settle. The text says what it says. The science found what it found. And the question of whether those two things point toward the same reality or simply toward the human tendency to find pattern and correspondence in darkness. That question remains genuinely open.